Warm welcome to all of you here at the Congress Hall of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, and also to those following us online. Today, we open the second edition of the UN Week in Slovakia, consisting of the series of events to honor the 77th anniversary of the UN. The series of exhibitions, presentations, meetings and discussions, mainly with the young generation, presenting the UN, its goals and achievements, and the role Slovakia is playing there. Today, we start the UN Week with a conference entitled The Role of the UN in the Post-February 24 World. We are very honored by the presence of the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, Mr. Rastislav Káčer, and look forward to his views on the UN, multilateralism, and how Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has affected it. We will continue the conference with panel discussion with State Secretary Ingrid Brocková and heads of UN agencies' offices in Bratislave on refugee crisis triggered by Russia's attack on Ukraine and how UN and we in Slovakia cope with the situation. You can see on the photo exhibition on the sides of this room both the human tragedy and suffering caused by war, and the testimony of empathy and solidarity offered by ordinary Slovak citizens to people fleeing from Ukraine. You will have a chance to speak to authors of these photographs at the ceremonial event. Ceremony and glass of wine will be held in the Podujatie Palace, which is the building next to this one, right after the conference. Two laureates will be awarded for their contribution to the noble role of the United Nations by Minister Káčer. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start the conversation with Minister and panel discussion we all are eagerly waiting for, please watch a short video from the opening of the 77th United Nations General Assembly in New York that will set the scene for the conference. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the program of today's afternoon. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order.
L'invasion russe en Ukraine. La guerra de agresión, la injusta guerra de agresión desatada por Rusia en Ucrania.
This and Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
A déclaré l'agression russe illégale.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Rosja przez swoją bestialską agresję na Ukrainę.
Rosja do Ukrainy侵略は
Une autre crise causée par l'invasion de l'Ukraine.
The unjustified, unprovoked, and illegal attack on Ukraine by the Russian Federation.
Eventos como la invasión de Ucrania por parte de Rusia.
141 countries deplored Moscow's war against Ukraine in a General Assembly resolution.
Greetings to all people of the world who value peace and unity between different and equal nations. I wish you all peace. Peace will prevail over any aggression.
This ship is the brave commander. It sailed the Black Sea with UN flag flying high and proud. On one hand, what you see is a vessel like any other plying the seas. But look closer. At its essence, this ship is a symbol of what we can accomplish when we act together. Some might call it a miracle on the sea. In truth, it is multilateral diplomacy in action. Each ship is also carrying one of today's rarest commodities, hope. Let's work as one, a coalition of the world, as United Nations. Thank you.
I would say that that was a very strong video, very full of strong messages and statements from the UN General Assembly session. And I'm glad that it is a very good kickoff for our conversation. My interview with Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovak Republic, Rastislav Káčer. Welcome, Minister Káčer.
Thank you very much.
And I'm really glad that we can discuss some of the most important issues from international politics and going on during the UN General Assembly session that you attended in September on the sidelines of UN Week in Slovakia. There's a really lot I want to discuss with you, especially regarding the war in Ukraine, but let me start with a point that your first foreign visit as a Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovak Republic was to New York to attend UN General Assembly session in September. What was your impression of this visit?
Yes, that is true. Even I haven't expected, because when I was coming from Prague for the ceremony with Madam President, I was not packed. I thought on the weekend I'm coming home, and this came suddenly, so all of the New York was a logistical nightmare, because I was living out of the small suitcase with few shirts and 2 suits and 2 pair of shoes. So this was not very practical, but first of all, this was not coming for the first time to New York on this occasion, but was exceptional, because coming as a minister and accompanying the president, the head of state, it's exceptional on its own. And second thing, even more exceptional, all the background, all the backdrop of 77th Assembly was on the occasion which we thought would never happen, and this was aggression of Russia, an aggression by a member, a permanent member, not only a member, a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN, of the organ which is responsible here, and it's supposed to be the guarantee of peace and stability, the institution which should watch over the order in the world. So one of those permanent members would cause an attack of on the neighbor, with the aim of erasing the neighbor, denying its right to existence as a sovereign state, killing its citizens. So this was rather weird and surreal backdrop for 77th Assembly, and was heavily marked.
Would you say that the atmosphere during the UN General Assembly session was dominated by this Russian aggression? Or is it just our European perspective that this is currently the most urgent global conflict that affects the whole world?
Well, you are not wrong in saying that we in Europe tend to be navel gazers and thinking we are the center of the universe, which is not truth. But I can honestly say that, and you saw it from these cuttings on video, that almost every single statement on the floor was to a large degree devoted to Russian war and Russian aggression. So overall climate, I think this issue overshadowed all of other 4 points mentioned there, or 3 points from the agenda, was heavily overshadowing. There was, in what I follow, there was not a single speaker who would not touch it.
This is something that I really wanted to know, because I remember last year when the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs was attending a GLOBSEC conference here in Bratislava. He made a very interesting point that I was reflecting on. I was thinking about for a long time as a European, that we Europeans sometimes tend to believe that our European conflicts, wars, are global problems. And when there's a war or conflict very similar going on in other parts of the world, we ignore them. This was the point of the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I was thinking about it a lot, if it is like that or not.
It's absolutely not like that. It's of course many conflicts in the world, of course, and it's causing a lot of horror, a lot of killings, a lot of refugees, and a lot of collateral of these conflicts. But this conflict, it's not like any other conflict which are currently living conflict. And frankly, I cannot recall any similar conflict since the end of World War II. And again, I repeat, a permanent member of the Security Council attacking its own neighbor, abusing the agenda of minorities, denying its right for existence, using a wrong historical arguments, saying that you were always part of my empire and now I'm claiming you back in this. And this is done by a permanent member of the Security Council, a nuclear state armed with nuclear weapons. I would really be curious what was a similar, or what is a similar conflict like this, because there is none. There is none. So this is not a Eurocentrism on this. This is a global issue because this is eroding, undermining, and attacking all the principles on which international law and all the system on which sovereignty and security is based. Our own Slovak borders, our own sovereignty, it's based on same principle as was Ukraine. Even Ukraine had one on the top because this was a Budapest memorandum. It was an internationally binding agreement in which countries, including Russia, offered the guarantees for European security. So I really cannot find any other conflict on the principle, on the logic, and topped by the country which is a nuclear country and is threatening by use of nuclear weapons. So we got two layers. One layer which is functional systematic erosion, which is not happening at this scale nowhere else. And second, if we would forget about the first one, and second is that this is a potentially conflict which may involve use of nuclear weapons. And that's been taboo for all of us for a long time. And if somebody is saying that potential use of nukes, it's not a global issue, then I don't know what, you know what.
Exactly. Now you made me feel quite good, because I came to the same conclusion that if we think of any other conflict in the world, in the recent history, none of them brought us on the brink of a nuclear war or of a third world war, as we can see right now. There's an important point that we have to touch upon, and it's the fact that the UN General Assembly passed a resolution condemning Russian annexation of Ukrainian territories as illegal. Now let's take a look at the voting. It was very much the same as in March. To be specific, 143 in favor, 5 against, 35 abstentions. Now, first, could you comment a little bit on the voting? How do you feel about it, about these results?
There was a push to have a vote in the Security Council. Of course, this was vetoed by Russia. So on the floor, on the General Assembly vote, it's not that bad. There are some good news and there is some bad news. Overall majority is not that bad. So if this was only really a European issue on which the rest of the global community shouldn't be concerned, then, well, you know, we got solid majority for the vote. That is one thing, which is good news. Another good news is when we would look who was voting against, who was supporting Russia on this. And this is not a very good club of countries. So there is nothing to be, if I was a Russian foreign minister, I wouldn't be very proud of getting this kind of support. So that club is not very credible and nothing to be proud of. And then a mixed bag of news, some good news and some bad news, or potentially bad news, is when we look at the structure of those who abstained. Some abstain in calculation because they got some kind of dependency or relationship with Russia, or they just want to say, we don't care about these things, we are distant, it doesn't come to us, we would be waiting how this will play, and then we will see at the end. What probably deserves a closer analysis is position of big players, and this is China, on which I think Russia heavily relied, and they were seeking their strong diplomatic support, and not only diplomatic support. I think they were seeking much more robust support, including military support and supplies. And that is not happening. We see China in waiting position, and I think they are not delivering at all by Russian expectations. I remember having my consultations in this called trilateral dialogue. When I was out of service, I was there on my own capacity. This was a kind of an intellectual discourse between the United States, Europe, and Russia. And I was speaker for Europe at the event. And Russians, they said, well, you know, China, it's our ally. When we do something, China will support us, and you will be weak because we and China, and this was all the narrative was we as how we are strategic partners. By this vote, and not only by this vote, but also by all what's going on, China, it's far from that. India, to me, is a little surprise, and you already hinted there. If I was Indian Prime Minister, I would look at this a little differently, even if I was abstaining at this point, but probably I would use a little different rhetoric. But I think it's evolving. India it's a large country, it's a very dynamic country. To us, it's a traditional partner. We very much rely on India as an important democracy in Asia, and we diplomatically want to work with India. So we have a little mixed bag in between, in this gray zone, okay, let's call it.
Let me just a little bit step into it to be more specific. As you were talking about India, Indian Ministry of External Affairs has recently released a statement saying, this is a quote, "India is deeply concerned at the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine." It has not condemned openly the war, but it is deeply concerned. It's a diplomatic language, of course. Still, I would like to ask you if it's a sign that their position might soon change, and what would it take?
I'm very much hoping that it would change, because we see if somebody was confused in March, okay. But today, its situation is more black and white than ever before. We clearly know that who is the aggressor, and we clearly know who is the victim. There was no ground, no legal ground, no political ground, no emotional ground for what's happening. So it is becoming clearer and clearer that as we uncover more and more graves, mass graves in Ukraine, we see the evidence of torture, in killing of civilians, rape, stealing children and taking them out of the country, seems for good, and in all the atrocities, and even now with the escalation after mobilization, and also these sham referendums, and in everything what's going on, this is becoming so weird and so clear that probably Russia will have harder and harder to keep that gray zone in between of those who calculate, who will think, okay, so maybe if Putin was fast, successful, if the scenario of Crimea in 2014 would have repeated, probably this would be different. But it's not. Ukrainians are fighting bravely. European Union, NATO, in a number of other countries of the world sustain their support for sovereignty and freedom of Ukraine. So it's gravitating those who are waiting in this gray zone towards, I would say, towards the behavior or the position which is not only morally right, because it's absolutely morally horrifying what's happening to Ukraine, but it's also strategically important. So now we may see that it's not only a good thing to do, but it's a strategically sane option to be on the side of Ukraine.
Would it be a game changer if these two, the biggest players, India and China, would step up openly against Russia in this war?
Absolutely. You know, I think that would be a substantial game changer. People wait, all the international communities waiting for China, how responsible they would be, and I think this would be a good thing for China if they changed for India even more, because India is an important partner to Europe, to whole transatlantic space. It's a democracy. It's an economically successful project. So there'll be many good reasons. If I was paid advisor to India, I would say, yes, do it, do it. You cannot lose on this.
Is it only a question of time? Because, you know, the rumor has it that the message to Putin from these countries is win the war or end the war. But it cannot take that long.
It cannot, because it's got global implications, as we know, as we see. And if somebody's saying it's not, it's having implications. And implications are not the result of those who support Ukraine, or it means those who sustain sanctions against Russia, and etc. But this war cannot go any longer because it's a suffering and of people, but it's in principle it's extremely bad. Russia already lost this war, lost morally, lost politically. It finds itself almost in a diplomatic isolation, or if I would look at the relevant players, Russia is in the isolation, and Russia cannot afford, as the country, this type of isolation for too long as well, because this will lead into social unrest, into collapse of the country at some point. And this is not good news to us. We don't want that. We don't wish collapse of Russia, because this will open another chapter of a large country with internal erosion. We don't know in what this will result into. And again, I would repeat, it's a nuclear country, so it's in nobody's interest that this continues too long, not only for Ukrainian suffering, but also that this will be an unsustainable situation inside Russia as well.
This is what I wanted to ask you about the Russia being isolated, because it's something that Moscow opposes, saying that it's not true, insisting that it still got its allies. Maybe if you could reveal a little bit from the background in New York during UN General Assembly, if it was evident that Russia is or is not diplomatically isolated.
I'm opposing that I'm bald, aging man with grey hair and strong dioptries. I oppose it. But it's a reality. I may oppose it however I wish. It's a reality. And this is a reality. Nobody talks to them anymore. And Mr. Lavrov got even some problems to get to New York. And I think this was a good thing he got there. But and you would look a number of meetings and pictures he's got from that, and I'm not going to comment all of those because some are very unfortunate. Then if this is not a diplomatic isolation to a big power, a country which is a member of Security Council and largest country in the world, if this is not an isolation, then I wonder what there is and what that would be. And even when I look at this vote, look who is gang of your supporters. If this is not an isolation, then what else? It's a complete, I wanted to use a word which would be very unpolite, but then I used to use these F words, but I will not. It's this cluster. What? Yeah, I will resist. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agree that it's evident. The situation is evident, and you can call it whatever you want, but you cannot deny the truth, deny the facts, and the facts are evident also from the results of the voting. There's a big question: what can we do to motivate the countries that abstained to join our side? If it's a question of the right arguments and maybe of changing the communication and argumentation, this is something that I heard, that maybe we Europeans or Western world are not using the right wording, maybe we are not using the right arguments to get them on our side, or is this, what I just said, too idealistic, and the truth is that it's just a question of direct political and economic benefits that these countries expect from their position?
If this was a competition in which we would start it, I think with a little bit of political corruption and little pressure, we would have much stronger unity on that. And Russia actually is doing that. We saw some leaders traveling around some countries and clearly trying to politically corrupt and buy the support. They didn't get much for that. In return, they did get some success, but we don't do it. Because this is not a conflict which we would contribute in causing in no way. So we don't want to use these tools. But there is one thing which I wanted to stop at, because that's little. I'm curious myself, frankly, what we do wrong. Because when you would look into this cluster of countries which abstained, a large number of those are countries which are poorer and little less developed than would be countries of Europe or transatlantic space. And we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money to help this world with the problems they got. EU is the largest donor of development aid in the world. A lot of those countries on which we spend quite substantial amount of money and a lot of assistance was voting against. And sometimes you see politicians of these countries with emotionally, kind of emotionally displaying more understanding towards Kremlin than to us. So probably we do something wrong, that we channel money, and I'm not saying we should not, we should continue in doing that, but probably we need to look what kind of active PR and what kind of public work we do. But we are not good, even excellent in doing that at home, because in Slovakia, when you would look at 49% support Ukraine and 19% support Russia, that 19%, it's a huge number in the conflict, which is so weird and so against who we are. That's a big number. And even when we will look into that chunk, in particular young people in 20s and 30s who say, we don't care. This is even more scary, because if you are in your 30s and you say, this is this type of conflict at your doorstep, potentially spilling over to us, and you say, well, I don't care, I don't have the view, this is something wrong. So probably we don't do homework enough here, and we don't do homework enough in the countries which are target of our well-meant development aid. We should do something about this, because we don't do it right.
Maybe the framing of the conflict is not right. Maybe the framing of the conflict as a conflict or war between Russia and West is not very convincing for these countries. Maybe we should frame it as a conflict against aggressor or fight against aggressor who's changing boundaries by force, who's violating international law, rule of law. This is something that these countries should listen to.
Yes, the power of argument is precisely on the lines, as you mentioned. But truth is that we don't frame this as a world of Russia and the West. This is actually Kremlin propaganda which is framing this in this way, and probably we are not fighting this framing efficiently enough, because we refuse this framing. It's not the war. It's only that the values which are our values are in support of freedom and peace in Ukraine. So the argument which Russia was choosing, that before the attack, that Ukraine wants to be member of EU, or even the argument that NATO is pushing into Ukraine. This was the most ridiculous, stupid argument, since I was the one who was the Slovak NATO process since 1993 until 2004 when we joined. This was 11 years and nobody ever pushed us. We pushed ourselves so strongly and we were refused so many times. Nobody ever pushed, NATO never pushed to any other single country. So we should be more efficient with our counter-arguments and fighting the narratives which are spread by Kremlin. But well, again, I'm not going to blame others, because we don't do our homework the most efficiently here in Slovakia. Look at some politicians, and some politicians who were even before prime ministers, who would now spread the Russian propaganda as the most stupid rubbish. So we should be more efficient inside every single country of ours, so we can use that argument also externally. But you are absolutely right. We need to make clear to because these kind of border disputes and who belong to whom historically, probably you wouldn't find a single country in the world which wouldn't be concerned by this logic. Almost every country has got some history. They were part of some other country 100, 500, 700,000, 5,000 years ago. So where we stop, So this is easy to explain that, look, these are the principles on which you do not stick to those, you put your own country at risk at some point.
I maybe forgot to mention that I will be happy to also take your questions. If you have any questions for Minister Káčer, if you do, just raise your hand and I will be happy to place them. So think about it. What's the role of UN in this conflict? I know that it's a very broad issue, but skeptics might say that the reason for UN to exist is to prevent war in the world, yet we are on the brink of a third world war. So what's the meaning of UN? What is UN doing? What's the how is UN helping, and the UN resolutions to maybe mitigate the consequences of this war, the suffering?
Well, this is a large question. Where I grab it. The UN was created as a result of horror of World War II. And the world wanted to prevent anything like what we saw in World War II to happen again. The organization is not perfect. It's a human creation. I always used to say, maybe God's creations are perfect, humans are always imperfect, and we need to work on make them more perfect as they are. And even the evolution of humanity and the global evolution, this is not a static world, it's changing. When you would look into the history, even international law is such, and human thinking, the world is changing. And one of the features is globalization, and it's ongoing process. It's not a plan of Mr. Zuckerberg, or this is not a plan of Mr. Soros, or not the Illuminati or Trilateral Commission. It's not. It's simply happening. And I say globalization started when the first humans understood that you can walk across savannah with your stick in your hand and walk north and discover other parts of the world. This was the beginning of globalization. And it's only speeding up, and that speeding up is given with technological progress and world becoming smaller. So probably the organization, which was based in 77 years ago, might not perfectly fit and reflect all the challenges of modern world, might not. And it's not static on its own, because all of you who are part of this business, you remember that we've been talking about reform of the United Nations, reform of the Security Council, reform of its institutions so many times. And there was some successful steps in these reforms, and we still continue in doing that. We try to fit the organization or carve or adopt the organization to be fit for 21st century. This is going to be serious test of the UN, what's happening. This is serious test. And maybe this will serve as an impetus of some of the changes on which we work, that we will accommodate it to prevent something like this happening. So reform of the Security Council, etc., etc. But there are many other institutions in the world which are sub-regional, which play a role related to this kind of conflict, and I'm truly, and small nations should be, I take multilateralist, because you cannot guarantee your own interest better than in this multilateral context, because it offers at least some rule. And here, if I say that it's far from perfect, which is truth, but we have at the moment nothing better. And this is like when they blame Prime Minister Heger that he's inefficient in what he's doing. I often smile and say, you know, this is like following a poker players, and you sit or you watch it on TV and you say, oh, the bloodsucker, why don't you play those two aces? Why don't you play two kings? And they don't see that in your hands you got 1-7, 1-8, 1-9. But it's the card we have. So UN is far from perfect, and we have to play it as we have it. Absolutely. And try to improve it.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. And now I have another $1 million question for you regarding the reform of UN and its bodies, especially UN Security Council. I would help myself with the words of a French envoy to UN, saying that this war in Ukraine could be a game changer. It could be the last drop that would push us to really perform the deep reform of UN Security Council. How should it look like?
You know, theoretically, we could carve here if we would do, you know, choose 10 smart of this crowd and do half an hour brainstorming. I think we would come up with an excellent model how that should work. This wouldn't be $1 million question how it should look like. $1 million question, and to which if I had the answer I would be a rich man, because I'll sell it. Is how to do it, you know, how to achieve it, how to persuade, how to overcome all the blocking mechanisms of the system, you know. So to me, and we have that debate, ongoing debate, on the substance, what the substance should be. That we can find the smart brains, but how to make it a reality, that is another $1 million question.
Exactly.
A true one.
Exactly. I will make it a little bit more specific so that we are not so broad in this topic. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called on EU members, UN members, to strip Russia of its veto right, because we can see that it's just not working like this. That UN Security Council is just not fit for 21st century, and we can see what Russia is doing, how it is violating the UN Charter. So my question for you is it realistic to strip Russia of its veto right in UN Security Council?
Well, this is really a kind of closed circle or chicken egg question, because today it's not easy. It's not truly very imaginable without. I don't see tomorrow how we could do it. But as he hinted that probably this escalation, I think if Russia used nuclear weapons, if they used it, I think this would change game so much that I think that this will create finally a mood and atmosphere which will turn the table upside down, and it will change a lot of things. I'm hoping they won't do it. I'm hoping that they will end the conflict as they started, so they will move away. Of course, this will only open questions. Then what? And then what will be not only about reconstruction in Ukraine, but taking substantial lessons from on global scale, how we prevent that Russia is not going to do this anymore, and not only Russia, but any other country of our global community is not repeating similar things. So I don't have the reply, I'm sorry, I would love to be more specific.
That was a perfect point, what you just made. Me as a journalist would be very happy if I was writing an article about it. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that that's a really, really substantial point. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I will be happy to place them.
You have very good questions on your own.
But I'm trying to make a space for the people present. In New York, you emphasized the need to maintain European unity in our fight against Russia as an aggressor. The question is if we are in Europe united enough, because there are states that spoil the unity. For example, Hungary refused to join other EU states who presented a resolution to UN Human Rights Council to establish a special human rights investigator to Russia. Are we united enough as a Europe in this fight?
I'll split this in two elements. One, yesterday, I was at Foreign Affairs Council in Luxembourg, and the main point on the agenda was Ukraine and the support on Ukraine. Joseph Borrell framed our debate at the beginning that there are three elements on this. There is a support to Ukraine, there is sanctions, and there is the accountability. And on support, that meant physical support with supplies, humanitarian assistance, military defense supplies, financial assistance, etc. Sanctions, saying that a round of escalation, sham referenda, illegal annexation of whole territories of Ukraine, the now targeting the civilian infrastructure, a lot of intentional civilian casualties and infrastructural damage, so people suffer more. So it will bend and break the resistance, and accountability that no crime like this should stay unpunished, and accountability should be made. And absolutely agree. And debate was revolving around this. We approved training mission for Ukraine. We approved additional 500 million funds for peace facility mechanism, etc. And I can tell you that there was strong unity across the table. So everyone who spoke clearly and in unity, including there was a very strong message from Annalena, my German colleague, which I acknowledged publicly, she said we will never accept anything, any peace deal, because now a talk of new propaganda is, let's make peace. You support war, we don't support peace. And she said clearly, there is no peace which will be done behind the back of Ukraine. We will never negotiate anything with what Ukraine will not be comfortable. And I can only, as a Slovak, and Czechs and Slovaks, we have a full right to say, no agreement behind our back, no new Munich, no new Vienna arbitrage, nothing like that. So message was clear, and there was one speaker who was not on this message clear, or who was offering a very confusing message. You can guess who that was. But I feel unity. So probably unity -1, but even here at the end, when it comes to vote, when we do decision at the end, it's unity. So we need to say this. So whatever is the rhetoric, and sometimes rhetoric which is very hardly acceptable to almost all of us, then at the end the vote is there.
And it's all that matters.
No, it's not all that matters. I don't agree, because I'm stressed this in a couple of interviews, and I'm saying this, and I apologize if I say this ad nauseam, but it's a very simple principle which is with us for centuries, if not for millennia. We prayed, I'm Catholic, we prayed every Sunday where we ask forgiveness of our sins, and we say, we sin by thoughts, by my words, and by my deeds. So I hate the argument when politicians, what they use, then they say, well, I'm saying this only because I want to grab some populist vote, and then when I will be in charge, I will behave differently. It's poisoning. The words they mean something, and they make reality. And when we saw it in hate crime, you may say, I'm just, saying about these gays and lesbians, but I don't mean, I have nothing against. But when you use harsh words, then it leads to harsh acts. So here, it's not only about the vote. Okay, that is the red line. If there was not a consensus, or if there was not that vote at the end, of course, this would be extremely bad. But words, they matter. And if a member country, or in Slovakia, if a leading member of the opposition party would use narratives made out of the Kremlin playbook, then I say, what is your intention? What is your intention? What do you mean? Where do you lead? Where do you want to get us? So the consensus, we should aim more. We should have a higher ambition than only at the end say, okay, so you were saying all the trash, and then finally you agreed, so, let's get over it.
Absolutely. Minister Káčer, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, for your thoughts. Let's hope that the international rule of law will prevail and Ukraine will be free. Thank you as well. I would like to ask you kindly to remain seated, because the next panel starts straight away. It will be dedicated to the topic coping with refugee crisis. So thank you, Mr. Káčer, once again.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying with us for this second session. I can promise you an inspiring discussion that awaits us, and I think it is guaranteed by these 5 excellent and knowledgeable panelists. So let me very briefly introduce them, and I will start from your left-hand side. Ms. Ingrid Brocková, State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. Just next to her, Ms. Daniela Popovič-Efendić, head of the UNHCR office. Next, Ms. Zuzana Vatralová, head of the office of IOM. Then Ms. Michaela Bauer, UNICEF country coordinator. And last but not least, Mr. Jan Orlovský, Director of Migration Office of Slovak Republic. My name is Peter Huleni. I am Director of UN Department in this building, in this institution. The whole conference, and I would say, the whole week, Slovak week in UN, is focused on Ukraine and on the UN and on OSN, the United Nations, and the interactions between these two. But This particular session we will speak about refugee crisis in Central Europe, and we will also speak about Slovak assistance to Ukraine, all these as a consequences of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. We have something about an hour, and we have to fairly share it among us, colleagues. And then I will still keep 15 minutes for the discussion, so please be ready for that. Without any further ado, Madam State Secretary Ingrid, the Minister mentioned just now that the reaction of the international community was unprecedented. Could you assess the reaction of Slovak government, Slovak public, civil society? Could we also call it unprecedented?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I will start with that I'm extremely pleased that we are starting the second week of UN in Slovakia this year with this conference. And I'm very pleased that we decided to have the central theme on this week of UN in Slovakia, the Ukraine situation in Ukraine, how the international community cooperates to assist Ukraine. So, but back to your question, I think I would have 3 points. First is that Slovakia from the beginning, since the 24th of February, very clearly stated that we are against this war, against this aggression of Russia in Ukraine. Ukraine is our neighboring country, and this is really the game changer in Central and Eastern Europe, but generally in the world. This is really unprecedented step of Russia. Actually, one of the member of the permanent member of the Security Council. So violating of the UN Charter, violating of the international law. So since the beginning, our government had very strong commitment to protect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. And since the first day, Slovakia has been trying to be very active to help, to assist Ukraine to be able to protect itself. And that means providing the humanitarian assistance, providing the military assistance, providing the political support. Well, Slovakia has been one of the countries which supported very strongly the candidate status for the EU membership for Ukraine, and also economic support. I have been myself very impressed by the strong mobilization of Slovak population across the country. This has been really the strong whole of society exercise, if I may say so. Very strong emotions and engagement of all parts of society, including the public sector, private sector, NGOs, and I'm very pleased that this effort, this energy and enthusiasm and empathy takes until now. And this has been also, I think, one of the concerns in the beginning, that we need to have sustainable solutions into place, the system, because we all know that this conflict will be long. So we need to have a system in place. To conclude, my first intervention is that I would really like to use this opportunity to appreciate the assistance of the EU countries and international community to Slovakia, because as a neighboring country, for us it has been a huge burden to cope with the situation, to address the situation. So the UN agencies, as I said, it was game changer. Some of the UN agencies came back to Slovakia, established the office to be instrumental, to be in place, to help Slovakia and also to Ukraine. Also the EU countries bilaterally, countries which provided the assistance to Slovakia and through Slovakia to Ukraine.
Yes, thank you very much. And I have to say that It's not only these three agencies that are represented behind this table. There are other UN agencies that are very cooperative. I should mention World Health Organization that is also presented here today, Food Program, UNDP, Red Cross, and so on, that played important role not only in Ukraine but also here in neighboring countries. This brings me to you, Daniela. I know you joined UNHCR in 1995, so you have experiences literally from all around the world, from the whole globe, and maybe you can compare. What are your first experiences from Slovakia? You are here a couple of months. When you compare the current refugee crisis in Slovakia, is it somehow different from those you experience in other parts of the world? If so, then in what sense? Are you facing some different challenges that you experienced in other postings? Floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Nail. Use the nail.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to this event. Thank you for organizing it. Thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to both of you personally here. I'm very pleased and I'm glad to be invited and to speak about the experience of managing the refugee crisis in Slovakia. I work closely here with a number of ministries and my counterparts from the government. And every time when we have meetings, when we discuss things, I always listen to how self-critical my Slovak partners are and how much they talk about things that could have been done better or were not done. And I always feel that I want to tell them, but I'm a bit scared. You did a great job. You don't have really, anything to regret. And I really mean it, because the sudden onset of this emergency, something that none of us could believe, and people around the world couldn't really see it coming. And Slovakia, the country that never had such an experience, you did a marvelous job. It's not like that everything was perfect. Many things are maybe not, some things are not done. But overall, the country really responded as one. And what I could see that the majority of the population, it really, government and the people, I could feel they responded with their heart, that Slovak people, Slovak government, groups and individuals, they felt emotionally, they felt this very personal, and they wanted to do their best. Maybe they couldn't do everything that can be done for refugees, but definitely there was a wish behind to do so. And this is something that is very, very inspiring, that our work here, I can also talk on behalf of my colleagues, we really feel working with the Slovak government that we are working with the partners. And this is maybe something, especially for the organization that I present, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And refugees is always a sensitive issue, and it's a big problem, that I really feel in Slovakia that the government wants to do things, government wants to do them right. It was the Slovak Ministry of Foreign Affairs also who invited us to come. They recognized this is the moment when UNHCR should return to Slovakia and give us their expert advice. And this is very responsible, and this is very mature. I don't want to, say that somehow that this makes it sound like perfect and not much has to be done. There's a major work in front of ahead of all of us, ahead of UN agencies in Slovakia and the government. But so far, I am genuinely impressed. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. I go to IOM. Zuzana, I can't resist to start the question by saying that literally on this very same place last year when we were celebrating UN Day, he was awarded with a golden plaque, and Madam State Secretary handed over you the ministerial plaque at that day. Things changed since then, unfortunately, in many ways. Unlike UNHCR, IOM is continuously non-stop presented in Slovakia. You are here for many years. Shortly after the outbreak of the war, your office was reinforced. What else changed in your professional life in IOM office since then? So what happened with IOM in Slovakia after 24th of February?
Well, you basically said it. We reinforced our presence, and that's it. No, but indeed, as you said, IOM has been working in this country since 1996, since Slovakia became a member of IOM, and given our mandate, we were mainly involved in integration of migrants who are legally residing in the Slovak territory, and obviously also our classical program of assisted voluntary returns and reintegration. And this was the capacity that enabled us to react really within the days and to be present at the borders within days. Since then, we grew like 5 times in terms of budget and in terms of size of the mission, and we continue to grow because unfortunately the response requires it. So we need to build capacity, and I think I'm speaking for all of the agencies here in the country that we need to increase capacity to be able to respond to all the needs of Ukrainians who are here on temporary protection or without temporary protection yet, but their needs are such that we need to continue to provide them emergency type of services in terms of non-food items, for example, cash assistance and other activities that normally IOM would not do in Slovakia, in a country like Slovakia, but we needed to adjust. And this is something which I find also unique to UN agencies. So when we are talking about multilateralism and UN in such situation, this is UN in such situations. There is one thing very important that is politics and policy within UN and New York and General Assembly, etc. But on the ground, this is UN, able to act immediately. If you think about IOM being present, we had that advantage, so we were able to implement activities immediately. Other UN agencies establishing their offices within weeks. And of course, granted, it was easier in Slovakia compared to some other countries because Slovaks, your government were cooperating well. But still, this is practically what UN means. We are able to be reactive in any kinds of situations, in any corner of the world. We are able to act immediately thanks to international presence, thanks to international capacity. My office here in the country, we would not be able to do it without colleagues and their support from other missions, without experienced emergency coordinators, without experienced emergency experts who were able to come and train local staff. Because in a country like Slovakia, yes, of course, we are heavily recruiting locally, and I'm talking now about almost hundreds of people by now. Like we are reaching 200. We will be 200 by the end of this year with all the operations and with also warehouse that we have in Košice, which is actually Ukrainian operation present in the Slovak territory. But altogether, we would not be able to do it without our colleagues. We would be able to do it by now, maybe, but not in March, not in April. So this is the UN in reality, if we are talking about it. And if you ask me what changed, everything changed, everything. For me personally, I realized how very spoiled we were before, how very much we enjoyed our work. We don't get to enjoy it much now. We are just doing what needs to be done, and hopefully we will get to enjoy it the way we did very soon. But thinking about emergency operation and working directly with traumatized people, not much enjoyment in that. We have to remind ourselves that thankfully we are able to assist, thankfully we are able to help. So this changed for me personally, and the overall, yes, we continue in all of the activities that we had before the war as the office here in the country. We are expanding those activities as well, mainly oriented at labor market needs, labor migration here in the country, dire needs of labor force in the Slovak labor market, and now we are actually combining and synergizing with our Ukrainian response, using presence of thousands and thousands of Ukrainians in the country who are able to work, so we are connecting pre-war, pre-emergency activities with emergency activities. So in a nutshell, everything changed.
Thank you, Zana, for bringing the work in the field to this, because we heard a lot about resolutions in the first session with the minister. But this is something that is maybe less communicated also to Slovak public, and maybe we should, as Minister said, do our homework here as well. But when we speak about field, working in the field, Michaela, the outbreak of the war caught you in Ukraine. You was working there for UNICEF since 2021. And then you have taken over the position here in Bratislava, the position of country coordinator. So you can share with us your perception and your experiences from both sides of the border. So could you bit elaborate on that?
Thank you. And thanks also to our colleagues for, joining forces here, because I think it really shows that the UN is acting as one, and that's part of the UN reform as well. But maybe, yes, as you said, I was in Ukraine when the war broke out, and we all know the figures. We all know that there have been 7.5 million refugees, 4.2 million temporary protections issued across Europe. But you know what, very often, and it's these pictures here, but what remains in my mind is the faces of children, the faces of women, grandparents looking after their children. The first early chaotic days with people fleeing Kiev and bigger city, all towards the west and towards Slovakia, crossing borders into Slovakia. But also, the whole uncertainty that people have felt, the fear that you could see in children's eyes, the fathers who are bringing their children and wives to the train station. But then I've also seen it on the other side. In the meantime, but even in the early days, because we went very close to the border, where there was huge traffic jams over the first few weeks, but just the hope that you could bring back to women and children, to grandmothers. And that is really due to all of you, and really a big thank you to the Slovak government, to the Slovak society for opening their arms. You see it on all of these pictures there, but also to government officials, to people like Jan, who hasn't had a lot of holidays since the 24th of February, to policemen and firemen who, have kept children safe, have ensured, that victims of trafficking have received the support that they need. It's really all of those. It is a whole of society event, a whole of society response, as the State Secretary said. But it is really also making systems work, strengthening systems and expanding systems. I think that's really the idea. The UN in a country like Slovakia is not here to build parallel systems. We're here to strengthen systems. They're of course overloaded. They were overloaded in all countries that have received refugees in that number. It is the biggest refugee movement since the Second World War. And it's this sort of expanding systems and strengthening them, both in terms of the quality, but also in terms of the reach. And this is what we're here for.
And we are very grateful, of course, to all of you. We can go back to the governmental point of view now. After three agencies, Migration Office is, and the Ministry of Interior, of course, is playing a main coordination role in coping with the refugee crisis. Jan, where has the Slovak government succeeded so far when you look at 8 months back to February, and in contrary, where there is need for improvement, take the opportunity to show off?
Well, I would rather go back to very kind words of Daniela, and I'll try to be a little more critical about the response. Obviously, the government has been caught off guard, as many other countries around the globe or around Europe. And just to point to the numbers, my office has been in charge of basically international protection in Slovakia, which entails basically 4,300 applications for asylum in the last decade. 4,300. and suddenly you have 15,000 people pouring across the border on a daily basis. So basically, in those 6-7 months we have seen so far, we have now 97,600 applications for temporary protection. So that basically makes it the third largest city in Slovakia. A population year in Slovakia is about 60,000 first graders who enter the school system of the country every year, 60,000. So you have, by estimate now, about 70,000 people who are residing in Slovakia, because out of those 97,600 people applied or actually granted temporary protection, 7,100 already revoked the application based on the fact that they returned home or they went further out. So from my perspective of a migration office, this has been crisis that has been also in all the horrific pictures we have seen, also good for Slovakia because it points out to a structural deficiencies we have in the system of taking care of foreigners, as well as pointing out to deficiencies we have in the healthcare system, educational system, housing policies, housing market as such. So that basically brings out the things we have left unattended for many decades up front. And now we are confronted with the fact that the kindergartens have been calling on officials, we need more place for just the Slovak kids. So out of those 97,000, almost 1/3 are children under age of 18. So at the moment, the number of kids estimated to be in Slovak school system is only 1/3 of the total number. So there are still 2/3 of Ukrainian children who attend only online schooling or not non-schooling at all. So that's all what I see as a challenge for the for the months to come. And as the European Union has decided that the temporary protection status will be extended beyond 2023, so until March 24, we have another year to go. And if there is another wave of people coming in, the civil society, states, as well as the municipalities will be challenged by the fact that now there will be less Ukrainian diaspora, which was already in the country helping those who were arriving. I mean, the fact that we had 60,000 Ukrainians prior to the crisis helped with the fact that people could find relatives, friends, or actually people at least speaking the same language where they could go to. I mean, more than 2/3 of the people who are staying in Slovakia are staying with, people like you and me who stay in either my apartment or my house. Yes, the government pays tax-free to people who actually provide their houses, but there is a limited number of those who can actually go to any place. I mean, that's the universal, basically, report from any country. It's Austria struggles with it, Germany struggles with it. All the municipalities complain about their own governments not helping them enough, that we are doing this all with our own budgets. You states are not doing your work. So that's something that has to come, in the next few months. How do we do with the fact that there might be less willingness to help? But from my perspective of a migration office, without individual effort, without the effort of civil society, and you all embassies who are actually present here, with the exception maybe 2, there was super many extra volunteering hours of your staff, of you as excellencies, and just so I am totally overwhelmed by the warm feeling of coming as someone who had to face it every day. So thank you for that too. Thank you.
Thank you, and for already indicating some challenges that are ahead of us. Maybe we can follow on this by you, Madam State Secretary. Where you see the lessons learned from the last 8 months. How the last 8 months revealed in weaknesses of our system, or in contrary, does it make us stronger? I don't know. Are we more resilient to the further crisis? Are we ready for the winter that is coming?
Well, I would say that one lesson learned, and very clear lesson learned for Slovakia, is that a country with relatively very strong anti-migration narrative has changed. And that was really very strong signal from the population that with the refugees from Ukraine, that there has been such a solidarity and mobilization of the NGO sector, municipalities, private and public sector. We can argue whether that was enough or not, but it was mobilization, and there has been a huge wave of solidarity among the Slovak population. So that was really strong signal. The question now is, or the challenge is, whether there is a sustainability. And sustainability goes with the system in the place. Because we are speaking now still about 3,000 people crossing the borders of Slovakia daily. So it is not, we are the war has been taken 8 months and still refugees are coming. And yes, there is a concern that if the situation would not be better in Ukraine, that there could be another huge wave of inflow of refugees coming to Slovakia. And so we have to have the system. Second point is that now it is a lot about the integration of these refugees into the Slovak society. So that is about the system. When it comes to the education, schooling system and incorporation or inclusion of the students from Ukraine to the Slovak schools, when it comes to the accommodation, when it comes to the job opportunities, I think a lot has been done for these people to have at least a decent income to live in Slovakia. But question is whether we have sustainable system in place. And then the third point, the third challenge, what I see is the communication and narrative in the country, because it can change very easily with the misinformation, with the disinformation campaign and hoaxes and so on. That we could have very easily here anti-Ukrainian narrative, and we shouldn't allow that. We must not allow to any fatigue from the assistance to Ukraine. So the war is not over, and we have to do our utmost to help and to be ready to help. So unity and the effort of all actors is very important.
Well, you put on the table a long list of challenges. One of them is integration, and when it comes to integration, it is UNHCR that has an experience and expertise in this area. So, Daniela, when we speak about integration, what we are speaking about, integration of refugees, because we know it's not only employment, it's schooling, there are many components of these terms. So, what is UNHCR facing when dealing with integration? What we can expect from this in next months?
Okay, so basically when the refugee influx comes, when people are crossing the border, when there is an emergency and adrenaline, we all are running and working. But then actually when this main emergency flow stops, the real task starts. And then you realize how complex the socioeconomic inclusion and integration in a society is, because it has so many different aspects, and it's difficult to say which one, if any of them, is more important. It starts from, as you said, accommodation, accommodating such a large number of people, providing them access to all necessary basic services, health, education, social welfare, other benefits that maybe disabled people need. And then, of course, employment and equal opportunities, and addressing specific problems that this population may face, because you well know that I think 85% of population is women and children, and that composition brings also additional challenges, kindergartens. It's very, very difficult and very complex, and in many ways it's more complex than the actual flow of refugees. But out of all these issues, Although I'm from UNHCR and we always emphasize the access to services, it's really difficult to say that any of them is more or less important. But when we look overall, employment is a key. Employment is a key to a refugee inclusion and their sustainable life and independent life. Because if we ensure together with the help from the UN agencies and the special organizations, to help the government to make access to employment possible to Ukrainian refugees, to simplify and to accelerate the procedures for recognizing the certificates and diplomas, providing the language trainings and giving them access to market, they become independent. And then they can themselves pay for their own accommodation, for school, for health. They're not a burden to the society, and they actually contribute to society, and they are a productive part of it. So everything is important and everything is difficult, but I would say, you know, like that employment is a solution. What is really great is that the government already finalized the draft on the strategy on the integration and inclusion. So at least there is on the paper, and there is a vision, and there is a way of where to go. We as UNHCR, we have experts that will share the experiences and the lessons learned from other similar situations in the world, try to help to adjust them to the context of this crisis, to the context of the refugees from Ukraine, and provide all other technical support that is needed, as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam State Secretary mentioned at the beginning that one of the challenges is communication. It was mentioned that the narrative of the migration topic changed after the war in Ukraine. You experienced, Zuzana, the refugee crisis in 2015. Is it really the case? Are we different society now after 2022, after February? Is the messaging and communication better? Is the situation is the perception of the refugee crisis different? Are we able to fight the hoaxes and disinformation in the public? So how do you assess this?
First of all, I don't have enough information to assess it properly, so it's more observation than assessment or judgment of the situation. And our observation is that, yes, certainly it has improved. And we must acknowledge that the government is doing much more to address discussion and overall narrative on internet, for example, and social media. So we sense and we see that improvement. And what is very helpful, and what we saw and we're saying already from 2015, what is enormously helpful is when not only influencers and people like celebrities, but also the government steps up and the government stands behind the emergency response or refugee response. And we could see it now that people were helping generously and out of heart, as Daniela said, but also the government was supporting it, because the government has followers, has voters, so we cannot kind of overlook or try not to see politics and politicians. They play enormous role. But having said that, I also have to say that I'm not sure how much better situation is, because it hasn't been tested properly yet. And unfortunately, this crisis and war in Ukraine has not replaced other wars. They are still going on. We still see other millions of people who are in need of protection, and they are coming our way, unlike in 2015. Numbers of irregular migrants in Slovakia and crossing Slovakia have grown enormously in the past couple of months. It has already created issues with the neighboring countries like Czechia and Austria. They imposed border controls. It already stirred certain political discussions. And I think this will be the first test of change narrative and change attitude towards migration, because it's also migration. And vast majority of those people coming are Syrians and Afghans who are in need of protection, but they are not asking for protection on this territory. They are not asking for protection in neighboring countries. They're seeking protection somewhere further, to make it complicated for all of us. So it's complicated for us to assist them, to help them, and we need to help them. We cannot leave them in those bushes and in those forests, alongside the border between Slovakia and Czechia, and maybe Slovakia and Austria. So I think this will be the first proper test of attitude of the country towards migrants, because if I would dare to be politically incorrect, and I apologize for that, just for the sake of discussion, it's easy to have positive attitude towards women and children who are coming. It's more difficult to have it towards different types of societies, different types of cultures, etc. So I think this will be the proper test. I also wanted to add something, if I may, to what Daniela was saying about integration. While I fully agree, I would also add not only employment, because having communicated this, I already encountered a couple of times that people were saying, well, they can work, so what other support they need? Why are we still supporting them? They can work, they're under temporary protection. Yes, in theory, formally speaking. I would talk more about income activities. They cannot open small business, and given the structure, as Daniela rightly said, they are mainly women with children. They cannot work as hairdressers, for example, or manicurists. We have thousands of clients who would be using this opportunity, but in Slovakia, you cannot get employment like that because it no longer exists, apparently. You have to have your own živnosť, your own small business. And that is not available to them yet. We are still working on it. We are still trying to convince the government to change the law to enable them to have, in general, income activities, to be able to reach everything what Daniela was talking about. Thank you.
So we still follow the order, so you know that what will happen. Michaela, I just noticed that it was in the media yesterday that 4 million children fell below the poverty line because of the war, and 3/4 of them are in Ukraine and in Russia. But when we were discussing the challenges, it was mentioned that schooling is one of them. So what should be done better here, and what are the challenges in this area dealing with your target group, I mean?
Thank you. And as was mentioned, this is a child rights crisis, and I think this is what also compels us to look at, in particular areas, at what are the right recipes. I think the good news is, on the one hand, that we're dealing with a government, with a society that, at least until now, and there I agree with Susanna, treats a child as a child. And so far is not distinguishing between a Ukrainian child and a child from somewhere else. We have to do a lot in order to avoid that, but I think it's clear that there's huge challenges, and you had mentioned just one of them. Poverty is one of them. Education is another one. Access to health is another one. Access to child protection, ensuring that the most vulnerable children are protected, is another one. But we also know that there are some solutions at hand. And I think what is really important is that I think we collectively, as UN agencies, and of course as well our colleagues from WHO and others, I think we have some of the recipes as well that we know that work from other countries. And I mean that we're not applying here a cookie cutter approach and, rolling out the standard emergency response. I mean really also experience from upper middle income and high income countries in terms of strengthening systems. And I think that's really the key. When it comes concretely to education, as Janis said, we have 1/3 of children outside of education, Ukrainian children who are in the country. What we can do is different things, but I think what we really need to focus on, that we work on solutions that are focusing on both Slovak children as well as Ukrainian children, in order to also address this criticism of positive discrimination. So, for example, we have been creating, together with the Ministry of Education, 7,000 additional preschool places, because we know that kindergartens are scarce in some areas, for Slovak children as well as for Ukrainian children. We can do something similar in the area of health. If we speed up the recognition of professional degrees from Ukraine, if we hire additional pediatricians from Ukraine, we can fill some of the empty spaces in pediatricians' clinics that all Slovaks are facing. So I think there are some win-win solutions, but the support needs to continue. You mentioned poverty, the 4 million children across the Europe and Central Asia region. We have been supporting collectively, IOM, UNHCR and UNICEF, the payment of cash assistance. We will continue to do so, but we will do it in a very targeted way to ensure now that, especially during the winter, but also, for example, during the beginning of the school year, we pay additional targeted cash assistance to avoid that families are falling into poverty. But I think the key is we need to continue to work on this inclusion piece, which is really the key. And there, I think nobody has all the answers, but it is really about highlighting that this is a common challenge, but that the solutions are there and that nobody will be left behind. I think that's really the key message of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is leaving no one behind. No Slovak poor child should be left behind at the expense of a Ukrainian child.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good point. And one important message here is that by what you are doing in the inclusion process and integration, we are benefiting. I mean, Slovakia is benefiting as well. So it's not, you are building capacities that could be used in the future and that are very helpful for us. Before going to the last question, I just remind that soon you will get a space, you will get a floor, so be ready for some questions from the audience. But prior to that, Jan, Migration Office was working together with the agencies on the contingency plan. I know the plan is just going to be discussed in the cabinet tomorrow, and I don't want to ask you to reveal any secrets. Anyhow, could you share with us what is the worst scenario? And if you are ready to cope with it in the next few months?
Thank you. This would be more question to my colleagues at the crisis management section of the ministry. And Braňo Tichý somewhere here in the room is. There he is, so he's one of the co-designers of the program. But basically, what the plan is counting on is another 100,000 people who might be coming in and stay in the country. So it's 700,000 crossing in various capacities, and then about 100,000 being staying here. What the number in final days will be, it depends on how the situation develops in Ukraine, how the peace or war will continue. So this is very hard to estimate at this point. So I think the challenge there will be not just the material preparedness, but also mental and moral preparedness of the country to handle this. So coming back to Michaela's message about not distinguishing between the Ukrainians, the children of Ukraine and Slovakia, I think we've made that mistake many times over in Roma programming, for example, that even now we have 900 million, almost 950 million devoted to Roma programs in Slovakia, which for me is very difficult to implement then on the ground, because if you are familiar with the situation, we have 800 plus settlements in the country which need the attention. Most of these settlements are basically on no man's land or illegal land. Therefore, to address the issue of where these people would live, you have to figure out now first the land. And you cannot go to a mayor with a settlement like this, like, Mr. Mayor, I would like to build the road to the settlement. And he says, like, but well, my sidewalks in the village are not done yet. So if you say this is the Roma money for the road to the settlement, the mayor of the city says, thank you very much, here is the door, leave, because otherwise my own village would kill me. So that's, and also in the planning for contingency, the major challenge here is where do you build that extra infrastructure you need, either tents or container houses or whatever that is. So our minister has reiterated many times over that this is not the crisis of Ministry of Interior, which is supposed to handle this. That this is the crisis which all the agencies of the government, the UN agencies, individuals, municipalities have to pitch in. So I think in the coming weeks, I would like to see more, I would say, better communication among the agencies of the state, also with the municipalities. I think finally also the EU programming is now focused more on responding to the crisis also on the level of NGOs and the cities, because the first was, oh, we'll just give money to the government. Now the even EU Commission says, well, 30% of the money we devote to the crisis in your country will be spent on municipalities and the NGOs. So that's, I think, for me, the important message that the government has to think, well, there are some people who we should also point as the donor, as the beneficiaries of the programs which comes strictly to the government. So I think the success of contingency plan is basically first 11 days. So that means people coming in, better selection of those who need our help so that we don't have someone who is the oncological patient be housed in a place which is 40 kilometers away from the hospital, which does have oncological department. So we have to do a better planning, and that's, I'm very pleased with all the NGOs working in the social affairs, that they are thinking of it ahead of time. You know, we heard from the agencies of the UN, now they have quintupled in numbers. I think I'm waiting for our own state to actually help with that. Like, we do need more staff also in migration office, which has not happened yet. The same applies for the section of crisis management. And I think we have to be frank with each other here, that we have depleted the civil protection units in Slovakia by 75% in the last decade because nothing was happening. So you have to have some people who are actually now doing it because, oh, I remember 10 years we did it this way. So this is all what needs to be addressed in the years to come, because this is a perfect storm of everything. It's the COVID crisis, it's the energy crisis, it's the two combined waves of migration coming through Slovakia, which also will require a better positioning of messaging towards the public.
Thank you for this. Now I turn my chair and also my mic and my vision to you. We have something about 10 minutes, so we can pick up 1-2 questions. If you are, I see also some hands picking up. So maybe we can start with, if you can. I know Mr. Martin Nesirky, director of UNIS Vienna. If I may ask Mike here, and then I see another hand up there.
Thank you very much. It's on. Good, on. Very good.
It's on. Yes.
Right, yeah. Yeah, my name's Martin Nezerky, and I'm the director of the United Nations Information Service based in Vienna, and the service also covers Slovakia, along with my colleague Jana, who's based here in Slovakia. You've covered a lot of what I wanted to ask, or to comment, in fact, and as a UN official like you, I do have to be careful what I comment as well. It was really interesting to hear from you, State Secretary, about the narrative and the communications around that, and how you feel that the narrative is markedly different this time from in 2015, but also things can change, and you very, Mr. Director, you very clearly indicated that, of course, that your staffing shortages and so on. So my first question has to do with precisely those challenges around communication and the narrative. The minister himself, in his earlier conversation, alluded to the most recent opinion poll, where the numbers don't look great for Slovakia in terms of the narrative. So I'm being maybe provocative here, but I'd be interested to hear your views, both from the UN perspective as how to deal with that potential. The other thing is sitting in Vienna, where, as you've mentioned, there are the similar challenges. I mean, I have to say, and following the Slovak media, thanks to Jana, I have to say that it's very clear the remarkable job that Slovakia has done and continues to do. So I'd be interested, cutting this now short, from the UN perspective, my colleagues from the different agencies here, and perhaps also from WHO, you've mentioned some of the key challenges that you have. Do you feel, to what extent do you feel that the donor fatigue factor might kick in? To what extent do you feel the funding that you need will continue to arrive for what you need to do? Thank you very much.
Maybe I will pick another question. I saw the hand there. It's Daniel Kaba from the Umbrella organization of development NGOs.
Thank you very much, Peter. My name is Daniel Kaba, Slovak Platform for Humanitarian Development NGOs. Thank you very much for convening this conference. What I'm missing here is the views of civil society, and all the more thank you, Anne, for trying to rebalance a bit the things, what works, what didn't in the recent past. But now, and I'll probably be a bit complimentary with regard to my predecessor in terms of the questions, but a bit more specific as well. We know, and that's based on the UN statistics, that currently the estimates are that 300 million people are going to need humanitarian aid by the end of this year, which is by 30 million more that was predicted last December. So now the two questions are, at the same time, at the same time, we would probably agree to lesser or larger extent that the official humanitarian system of Slovakia is largely outdated, and there hasn't been any significant modernization in the past 15 to 20 years. But we all are on the same board, and we know that we need to do something about it. So now to the questions. What are the main areas or things the Ministry of Foreign Affairs wants to or is planning to improve in this sense, in terms of humanitarian system being part of official development assistance? That's one thing. That's probably more towards Ms. State Secretary Ingrid Brocková. And the second is about donor fatigue, as it was already mentioned. What are the state authorities, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is the main interlocutor in the Slovak ODA, gonna do in terms of increasing towards facing the donor fatigue, increasing the Slovak humanitarian aid budget for the next year, and or how to preserve the budget against the sheer inflation that might hit the Slovak budget and society, with solid predictions going to up to 15%, which would mean that Slovakia would help less people at the end of the day if we wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So, thank you.
Thank you for the question. If I don't see any more hands so far, so maybe I turn to you back. Who will pick up the first question, or maybe we can start with you, State Secretary, and to the second question, and then the communication that is broader. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So should I start with the third one or the first one?
It's up to you.
Maybe very briefly to all of the points which were raised, to the communication. Thank you very much for that question, because we feel, especially in this country, where when you see the results of different surveys, how, for example, Corona has been perceived, or how now the war in Ukraine has been perceived. So we need to strengthen the capacity of the government and all of the society to have better strategic communication. So speaking about the communication, not only about on the national level, but also on the global level, what the minister has been saying about the narrative in the third countries about the war. It is also important to outreach to third countries and to explain better what is going on in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine has not been the European problem, but it has been a global challenge to all of us. But back to the national level, We are aware of that, so obviously the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the first institution, naturally, which is hit by all misinformations and hoaxes and so on. So we have been, in the last 2 years, have been trying to build the capacity within our ministry to be more resilient, but also it is necessary to do it on the national level. So the Office of the Government recently has been building has the unit which is focused more on strategic communication, and also other line ministries. During the Corona crisis, it has been evident that Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health Care hasn't been resilient enough to all of the misinformation and so on. So it is, again, the whole of the society exercise or response to be more resilient as a society to misinformation. Regarding the donor fatigue, I will say only that yes, most probably it will come, but we must not allow it as an international community. And what is important, what I find very important, is that we have the international community has started already to discuss the recovery plan for Ukraine, and there has been a very strong ownership of government of Ukraine, and of course it has been the moving target. The war is going on, but we need to have that discussion, how to coordinate ourselves, and this recovery plan has 3 phases. The first is the immediate assistance to Ukraine now with the infrastructure destroyed by the war when it comes to the schools, hospitals, and so on. Second phase, reforms, structural reforms, and third, the modernization of the country, green and digital transition, and so on. So it will come, and there will be more and more discussion in the international community how to help the Ukraine with the recovery of their country. Regarding the humanitarian system of Slovakia, or the system of providing the humanitarian assistance, it's not only competence of our ministry, but also the Ministry of Interior. And crisis in Ukraine is not the only crisis we have to respond to. But in the last 2 years, we were honest to ourselves, and we were trying to identify the bottlenecks in our system to provide very flexible, addressed, and very rapid humanitarian assistance to those who need it. So in our ministry, we put a list together about the different steps what need to be done together with the Ministry of Interior to make our humanitarian assistance more efficient and more responsive to the needs to other countries. Regarding the ODA budget, yes, this has been every year struggle, and you know that very well. We cooperate very intensively with the platform of development NGOs. Yes, there is an envelope of the state, and of course we have to take into consideration the situation, the overall economic situation of the country. But having said that, yes, there has been a change in the prioritization of the ODA. There has been a change to be more flexible to the needs in Ukraine, specifically in the last months. So I think there is a certain flexibility how we can respond to the needs of other countries. Representation of the NGOs here today. As I started, this is the beginning of the week of UN in Slovakia, and next week we will have one separate day devoted to the cooperation of the state with the NGO community in Slovakia and the UN priorities. So we were thinking about you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe to start from the question related to changing communication strategy in Slovakia. As many of you know, for years and for decades, from a refugee agency point of view, Slovakia was not a country of destination. Refugees are not going to Slovakia. They would just, it was a transit country. And there were not many people seeking asylum in Slovakia. UNHCR had an office to capacitate the relevant authorities how to deal with potential asylum seekers, but there was not much work really, and that's why we also closed our office once we finished the job. But with Ukrainian crisis and as I explained, the response, it was very, very emotional and personal to many Slovak people. We noticed that the atmosphere is changing in the society, not only because towards refugees from Ukraine, but towards the refugees in general. And I'm really glad to say that the same was recognized and identified by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we already discussed it, like, I would say 2 months ago, how we're going to work on that to capitalize from this momentum to change this environment in Slovakia, because Slovakia really deserves that as a European country, as a country that embraced Ukrainian refugees so warmly. And there are many local and regional and global aspects to embracing refugees in this part of the world and this part of the Europe. When we talk about funding, I mean, and listening to the figures, UNHCR mid this year came out with a figure of over 100,000 forcefully displaced persons around the world, and this is a huge, unprecedented number. Our agency alone managed and worked in 40 different emergencies during the last 12 months. And then when I look back, this year I worked in 3 emergencies. I was in Kazakhstan during the civil unrest, I was in Afghan emergency, and now in Ukraine emergency. So these numbers and how frequent it is happening is just showing the state of the world today. The situation is difficult. And when it comes to funding of Ukraine emergency for UNHCR, but I would say for all our agencies, priority will always be to channel funds to Ukraine, because there's so many internally displaced people there and many people affected by the war that we want to assist, and then of course to the neighboring countries and then around. UNHCR leads the regional refugee response plan, which is a basically funding tool for the whole region that accepts Ukrainian refugees, and we already started working on 2023 plan. So we count on our donors as much as we are one world. If we don't help and the situation gets out of control, it's not good for anyone. And we also know that our donors are responsible and reliable, and they will help as much as they can. As an agency, we are very flexible. We are able to quickly come, work, shrink, expand, and we will also do that this time. We are professionals, and this is a normal state of affairs. But I think we will have funds to do the core things, and then it's really for the whole world and for all the UN members, you know, to see and recognize where they want to channel the funds. But there are too many emergencies in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. On communication, as you know, we are quite active, or try to be very active in this country in communicating topics of migration. And we see what has been working, what has been successful is to neutralize the topic of migration in general, not to talk about migrants as all of them are great, because it's not true, they're people just like us, but also not to create from migration topic and forced migration, labor migration, any security or to security world or to security work and etc. So we believe in neutralization, and I would like to add what Ms. State Secretary was mentioning, also very important role of education of schools and embracing critical thinking. And we are trying to get involved more and more in that as well through our activities also here in Slovakia, to to contribute to education of students, mainly young people, to be able to evaluate all kinds of information properly, critically, and come to their own conclusion, even if it's against migration, but well argued and with good substance. Like, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be pro-migration, in our opinion, but if somebody is against, at least it should be based on facts. It should be based on data, and it should be kind of founded opinion of the person, not just reading something and saying, oh, my feeling is that I don't like those people because they are different. What will be helping, this is our experience from other countries, is to see, for example, Ukrainians on the labor market, to see them well included, well integrated. And this way we can all say, and we can all argue, like, see those people you didn't even notice they're of different origin. They're fulfilling their places, they're contributing to the society. This is what is happening in other countries. And we have this experience from many countries that once migrants start to be real part of society, it's much more difficult for all the hoaxes and all the fake news to get through, because people have experience. It's the easiest if you don't have experience. If you don't meet migrants, it's the easiest to fall into trap of false news. And this brings me to another question, donor fatigue in Slovakia. I can speak for IOM here in Slovakia. We already see, for example, EU funding reacting very quickly. Our mission before the war was funded mainly through EU funding, locally managed or managed from Brussels by the European Commission. And we already see that as of November, expansion of our Migration Information Center that was funded right after the war through bilateral funding, emergency funding, will continue from AMIF, Asylum and Migration Fund. So we will need bilateral funding and emergency funding for emergency activities that unfortunately need to continue. But when we talk about integration, it's not so much emergency. And for integration, we already see good diversification of funding. Because Slovakia is a rich country, and Slovakia has EU funding. So it would not be fair to other emergencies that Daniela was mentioning to seek money for integration that can be found somewhere else. So we already see it in practice, and we already, like, for example, we have a project funded through Resilience and Recovery Plan for Slovakia after COVID, where eligibility criteria changed and adjusted to the Ukrainian situation, and we are able to spend that money also helping Ukrainians. So all this is already happening, and yes, a certain donor fatigue is natural and sometimes even legitimate when we talk about long-term solutions in countries like Slovakia. So that's why I mentioned that we already see diversification, and to be very honest, I don't worry about the 2023. We will have funding available to us to continue in needed activities.
Good news.
Thank you. I think a lot of the things my colleagues have already mentioned, but I think we need to acknowledge that misinformation and deliberate misinformation on social media is a fact we all have to deal with. I think we need to better understand it. We really need to, and that's why in our team we have somebody who deals with this on social and behavior change communication, to understand what is said on social media, what children are reading, what young people are reading, but also what the broad public is reading. And then I think we really need to also use children and youth from our perspective as communicators of that inclusion works. And I think if you see children at kindergarten age playing together, they don't grow up with a notion of that their friend is different, they're all the same. And I think similar with young people as well. I think we need to create the opportunities to bring Ukrainians together with Slovak young people to avoid these stereotypes of that this is not at the end of the day, what benefits society overall. When it comes to donors, and I have spoken to quite a few recently, both private sector as well as public sector donors, I think what they want to see is results, and they want to see that the money that they invest achieves results. I think where the UN comes in here is that we have relatively quick and, if you want, sometimes less, long-term funding available, but we have the funding available that can also demonstrate that an expansion of a service can work, or an innovative model of preschool can work, and this can then be scaled up with EU funding in the long term. So I think it's really about trying to show that each and every euro that we invest contributes to a more long-term sustainable change.
Maybe, Jan, if you wish to, last words, and then...
I would just conclude with the fact that the media war is as important as the response on the ground in terms of material need. There is a friend of mine who actually used to work with me, who now works for the outfit called Gerulata, which is a company working with the artificial intelligence and actually deciphering the media space of Slovakia. So they say that when you look at the embassy's traffic on media website, not just media websites, but actually social media of the embassies based in Slovakia, the most active embassy is Russian embassy, with 1.8 million interactions in 1 month. The second best is US embassy with 65,000. So interactions meaning yes, no, sharing, whatever kind of comments, hate or like, whatever. But the fact that you have, at one hand, 1.8 million interactions versus 65,000 tells you what you stand up against in terms of communicating your message. And the message of Russian Federation at the moment is not to give the truth, it's to give you confusion. So they come up with 50 different kinds of things, what happened to MH17 downed over Ukraine. And it's so people don't care anymore. So that's so basically creating inertia in the society is very, very dangerous. So that's why I think the media war is very, very crucial to our final results, not just success in integration or inclusion or whatever we call it, but we have to look at this environment in a much more structured way. So there is a work for you, sir, to do with the UN too. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I should say the time dedicated for this session is over. Please join me in applauding to our panelists.